What was the dumbest way someone has died that you've heard about? Story 1. There was a guy who came to our high school to give this speech about drinking and driving. He said, now that graduation was upon our senior class, that we should be cautious, and if our peers happen to be under the influence, we should watch out for them. Drive them home, call adults, and whatnot. Barely 2 weeks after that, dude passed away due to drinking and driving. Story 2. While I was in high school, my agriculture teacher was driving the bus to take me and the rest of my FFA chapter to a convention. On the way, he ended up making an unexpected detour to a graveyard. He parked the bus, got off, and went to have a moment of silence by one of the tombstones. Everyone on the bus was confused, but we gave him his time because we could see that it was important. We asked him who he was visiting when he got back on the bus. He said it was one of his childhood friends. When he was a kid, he and his friends were roasting marshmallows by a fire. They were f***ing around like kids do, and one of his friends accidentally ended up putting one of the hot roasting sticks through another friend's eye. I don't know the specific medical complications that took place, but he ended up dying. It was a total freak accident. I'm 27 now, but that story always stuck with me. I thought it was really sweet and thoughtful that he made a point of intermittently visiting his childhood friend. But also, what a dumb way to lose your life, especially at such a young age. Story 3. Toronto lawyer Gary Hoy was giving a tour and decided to demonstrate his favorite party trick, throwing himself against the windows of the Toronto Dominion Bank Tower so the students could see just how resilient the glass was. Hoy had performed the stunt to audiences countless times before. As well as demonstrating the strength of the windows, it was clear that he enjoyed showing off a bit. The first time Hoy body slammed the window that day, he bounced off as he had every other time. But then he threw himself at the window a second time. Instead of bouncing off the window as he had the first time, Hoy went straight through, plunging 24 stories down toward the building courtyard below. The fall killed him instantly. The glass didn't shatter immediately, but rather popped out of its frame. Story 4. One of my family members died moving a piano alone. He managed to get the piano up the stairs into the study hall he'd had. Now he refused to move this thing forever cause of how heavy it obviously is and to do it alone. He finally got the motivation and did it for my aunt. Then when he got it up the stairs he turned around and said he forgot his drink and he didn't realize how tired he was, so his legs gave out on him when he tried to step down the stairs and he tumbled to his doom. 13 to 14 steps and shattered his collarbone where it broke and shot into his neck, puncturing his jugular vein, killing him shortly after the fall. All cause someone wanted to move the piano so more guests could fit in the living room. They never get visitors. They never got visitors, not even on holidays. We all went to my other cousin's house, so this was pointless. Happened before I was alive, but we've kept the same traditions since long before this. Also, no one owns a piano except that aunt still does, and the piano is back in the original spot too, as if to flip off my uncle. Story 5. Eaten alive? Okay, it happens. Lions, tigers, sharks, crocs, there's a laundry list of carnivores that never met a man they didn't like, especially with mushroom gravy. But an elephant? It's happened, although under the furthest thing from field conditions. Witness the bizarre case of Bertha Walt. Bertha worked as an office drone at a Swiss zoo during World War II. Now, even though she wasn't an animal keeper, the very location meant she had ample opportunity for contact with the animals. One in particular was a male Asian elephant named Chong, with whom she developed a close relationship. And by a close relationship, I mean that she would sleep in Chang's stall every once in a while. I mean, I've heard of size queens, but damn. Anyway, one morning, Bertha didn't show up for work and Chang's stall looked like the set of a saw flick. The police, not quite accepting the fact that 2 plus 2 most likely equaled 4, went looking for evidence and found it in the form of Betha's frock, half digested in elephant turd. There's your smoking gun, officer. Story 6. A kid I knew got into an argument over something like skunkweed or whatever, was walked out into the woods with the other person, apparently his childhood friend from kindergarten, and ended up getting shot to death 3 times. The other kid dismembered him weeks later with the forced help of his girlfriend and partially buried some of the parts in concrete later after that. Some stayed in her trunk for a minute. They were only found out after a friend of the girl was told by her, who then went to the cops with her father. It was a cold case of almost 2 full years. He got 50 to 70 years on a second-degree murder charge. She only got a year in prison. I think she's out now and working as a subcontractor while hoping to get a degree in general business, and is hoping also to write a novel. The kid who was killed and I had been mutual acquaintances and tried to start a band together. He was a good kid from a good family and kind of talented on the drums. I stopped talking to him after an argument about him being musically selfish. He wanted us to be a 2-piece and I didn't was the main fight, and not listening to me on anything else. We never reconnected. He called me maybe 6 to 7 months before he went missing, aka was killed, one late night, and I hung up after not even a full minute. I was still angry at him. I regret not reconnecting. Story 7. ICU nurse here. This might not be the dumbest to a lot of people, but it was extremely frustrating to me. We had a guy come up and he wasn't my patient, but I helped admit him anyways, as you do. We're still rolling him into the room and the first thing he says to me is, "I have to go to the bathroom really badly and I'm not using a bedpan." He's physically winded just from talking to me, and I look up at the monitor and see that his oxygen is low. I tell him that I don't think that's going to be possible given his status right now, but ask that he lets us finish getting him hooked up to everything before we address it. We hook him all up and he is still struggling. I tell his nurse what he said and offer to help her convince him that the bedpan is the only option right now. She says she's got it and I go back to my patients. Unfortunately, that ICU had a strange setup where there was a toilet in the room completely out in the open. The patient could clearly see that it was there. There was no amount of convincing him, and he even got the charge nurse involved, who finally caved. This woman was an idiot, but that's another story. So she gets him up to walk over to the bathroom, and wouldn't you know it, his oxygen gets low enough that he collapses. We lose his pulse and start coding him right there on the floor. He was a young man, but we couldn't get him back. He died right there on the floor in a puddle of his own shit. I give a large portion of the blame to the idiot who let him do it, but he died out of sheer stubbornness and because he wouldn't listen to what no less than 3 different people were telling him. Story 8. In the early 80s my cousin got married. Her father, my uncle, with whom I was very close to, seemed to be not himself through the early part of the day. At the reception during the cocktail party, I, 10 years old, was beginning to get hungry and bored. My uncle, who was busy being the father of the bride, was making the rounds and welcoming all the guests. When he got round to me and the table of kids, he picked me up and asked me how I was, and my reply was bored. He pulled out his Nintendo Game & Watch and passed it to me while saying, "I'll be right back." My uncles on my mom's side were amazingly cool men. Reinhardt was the definition of cool in my book. Approximately 5 or so minutes later, here comes my Uncle Ronnie holding an entire serving tray of pigs in the blanket, which in the US are mini sausages, or hot dogs wrapped in a puff pastry. My favorite snack food. He had a huge smile on his face and proceeded to hand me the entire tray. At the exact same time he turned purplish blue and collapsed. He was dead before he hit the floor. Massive heart attack. There were several nurses in attendance, who immediately started CPR, to no avail. This event was so horrific, on so many levels, it is still incomprehensible and painful. I remember nearly every detail of that day. It was a junction in my life that completely changed my life's trajectory. I learned a life lesson that children shouldn't have to. Now, there is no comparison to the other stories in this post. But, in my 4 years since then, and many other painful deaths in my orbit, this was and still is shockingly unbelievable. The bride and groom are still happily married to this day. Story 9. An old co-worker of mine went out with his wife one day to the bar near his house and ran into his buddy. His friend was still slightly drunk and wanted to leave. Co-worker told his buddy to leave his motorcycle at the bar and stay over at his house, since it was close and he could drive them there safely as he was sober. His friend refused because he was mostly sober, and my co-worker decided to follow him home in his car to make sure he got there okay. As they were driving back, a flatbed truck pulled out in front of my co-worker's friend on a country road with a 55 miles per hour speed limit. His friend didn't have enough time to stop. He got decapitated by the trailer. According to my co-worker, his friend wouldn't have had time to stop even if he was sober. Said his only chance would have been to lay the bike down and crash. But the friend had just bought that bike and, likely in his impaired state, valued saving the bike more.